What if the Native Americans defeated the Europeans? For centuries, the Native Americans, commonly known as Indians, used to live in the New World or North and South America. In 1492, the Spaniards under Christopher Columbus discovered the New World when they landed in Hispaniola. They thought they were in India, hence the name Indians. Through conquest, disease, and genocide, the Native American population would dwindle into irrelevance, and most now live in reservations, while European settlers are now the dominant group in the Americas. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Native Americans defeated the Europeans? In 1405, when the Ming treasure voyages begun, instead of sailing west to India and Arabia, one expedition goes east and lands in the New World. They trade with the natives, and the natives are exposed to their technological advancements. They are also exposed to diseases, and a huge percentage of their population would die, but the remaining one would grow antibodies against those viruses. After 2 generations, this process is finished, and the native populations grow again. The natives are also equipped with guns and armor and learned how to make them. They also make their own adjustments that fit their culture. For example, Aztec warriors decorate their plate armors with lion skin, or they use more gold for their guns and armor. The 2 dominant powers are still the Aztecs in Mesoamerica and the Incas at the Andean Mountains. In 1492, the Spanish land in Hispaniola and still begin to colonize the Caribbean. In 1519, over 100 years since the natives and Chinese have opened trade, the Spanish conquistadors under Hernan Cortés land in Mesoamerica, with the aim being to conquer the mighty Aztec Empire. But in this timeline, this ends in disaster, as the natives are technologically on par with the Spanish, and the whole army of 630 and Cortés were decimated. The Spanish got the memo not to mess with the Aztecs anymore and leave them alone. Furthermore, in 1532, Francisco Pizarro tried to conquer the Inca Empire, and just like Cortés's expedition, it's a huge disaster, and he and his 168-strong army were also decimated. After being humiliated by the natives for the second time in 13 years, Spain decides to no longer pursue any conquest in the mainland for the time being, with other European powers learning this the hard way as well. Eventually, diplomatic talks between the Americas and Europe begin, and they begin to trade. It is also possible that they might lease the Europeans' port cities. The natives would trade gold or silver in exchange for weapons or other technological advancements from Europe. An Atlantic slave trade might still happen, but here it would be based upon a co-equal partnership between Europe and the Americas. These natives that trade with Europe would begin to conquer other tribes that aren't as advanced. These larger tribes would begin to establish more state-like institutions that they copy from the Europeans and might settle. These could include the Iroquois in the Great Lakes region, Cherokee in the Deep South, or the Comanche in modern-day Texas and Oklahoma. But who knows which tribes could be the ones to conquer the rest? Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, these expeditions were a pretty humiliation for Spain. Spain is significantly weaker in this timeline, as it can't profit off of gold and silver from the New World. Furthermore, they also probably don't colonize the Philippines. The 80 Years' War might conclude much earlier, as Spain wouldn't be able to afford such a long conflict. The Battle of Lepanto might also not happen because of the issues I just mentioned, and if it does happen, a smaller fleet would face the Ottomans and might even possibly lose, which would solidify Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Venice also have to give the Ottomans Dalmatia and Crete. If lucky, the Ottomans might even take Malta. The 30 Years' War, or in this timeline 15 Years' War, ends in a negotiated peace. The Habsburg couldn't fund this war and so made peace with Sweden. Sweden still gets Bremen and Pomerania and leaves Holy Roman affairs, and while the Holy Roman Emperor does fail to centralize power, the Holy Roman Emperor doesn't get federalized. France never joined the war. But Spain does have great news, as the Portuguese Restoration War ends in failure without French or British help. It is possible that, given that continental Europe isn't at war, during the War of the Three Kingdoms, Catholic France and Spain support the Irish Confederates, who might achieve independence. The new King Philip I, Duke of Orleans. He was still a minor at that time, but was chosen as king due to the fact that his father was and now his brother is the King of France, and his mother is the daughter of the former and sister of the current king of Spain. He rules for something between 49 and 61 years before he dies in 1701. The Ottoman siege of Vienna still fails, but the Ottomans and French manage to get more favorable treaties. The Ottomans still lose Hungary, but keep the Banat and Transylvania, and France doesn't cede Luxembourg, Kortrijk, Freiburg, Breisach, Kettle, and Lorraine. The War of the Spanish Succession still happens, but in this timeline, even when the candidate for the Spanish throne became Holy Roman Emperor and Archduke of Austria, the war still continues, as Austria and Spain are both weaker in this timeline, and thus a union wouldn't upset the balance of power. In the end, Karl VI manages to become king as Carlos III. Nonetheless, Habsburg power is still diminished by having to hand the low lands to the Netherlands and Sardinia to Savoy. Furthermore, Portugal became independent again, but with a lot of British influence, who also took Gibraltar and Menorca. France also makes territorial concessions to the participants of the war. Ireland, which joined on the side of France, was annexed by Great Britain. The French and Indian War doesn't happen in this timeline without French or British colonies in the New World. Without that, Great Britain doesn't take Bengal and begin to colonize India, and so they are left to their own devices. Furthermore, without a war, there are no taxes, and thus the American Revolution doesn't happen. Great Britain still owns Menorca and doesn't colonize Australia. Furthermore, without France becoming bankrupt, the French Revolution doesn't happen, and thus no revolutionary wars or Napoleon. Europe is still ruled by absolutist monarchs, and the age of nationalism doesn't happen, and so multi-ethnic empires, like Russia, the Ottomans, or the Habsburg, don't decline. Without the dissolution of the HER, Prussia doesn't rise to power and Germany isn't formed, so the world wars, and thus the Cold War, don't happen. The world of today is closer to that of 200 years ago. In this timeline, the Indians preserve their independence and develop completely differently. In Europe, Spain doesn't become a great power, and the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity don't rise. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.